Last year, I made a video about neuromorphic computing mainly because it's an extremely exciting field from a neuroscience perspective. And since then, I've been getting some questions from beginners and students as to how to get into the field. Now, while I'm not myself in the neuromorphic computing space, I do have extensive neuroscience background, and I was thinking of making this video to help at least those of you who are extremely beginner when it comes to neuroscience and maybe point you towards the right direction when it comes to neuromorphic computing. So if you're interested in getting into the field, this video might be helpful to you. Again, the caveat is that I'm not in a neuromorphic computing. I'm just trying to point you towards the right direction. But when it comes to the neuroscience part of it, I can with confidence give you some advice as to where to start. So let's talk about it. What is neuromorphic computing? Neuromorphic computing, as mentioned in my last video last year, is one of the most exciting frontier in both neuroscience and in computer science. It's a mashup of the two. It's the attempt to build machines that think, sense, and adapt more like humans and or animals, not by mimicking the brain superficially, but by recreating how the brain processes information at the level of neurons as well as the synapses. Neuromorphic computing is a field of engineering and computer science that aims to build machines modeled after the brain, not just in function, but also in structure. Traditional computers process information sequentially using a central clock and a digital logic. In contrast, in neuromorphic computing systems, we aim to use networks of artificial neurons and artificial synapses that communicate through electrical spikes, like in brainwaves activities within the brain, much like the biological brains and brainwaves. The brain-inspired in architecture allows for more efficient and adaptive information processing, especially in tasks involving perception, motor control, and decision making. Unlike conventional artificial deep learning models that require vast amount of data and a lot of power from their GPUs, neuromorphic systems are event-driven and they are extremely energy efficient. They process inputs only when needed, similar to, for example, how our eyes don't send a full video stream to our brain, but only alert us when something changes. This property makes neuromorphic computing and chips extremely ideal for edge computing, real-time robotics, brain-machine interfaces, and embedded devices where low latency and low power consumptions are critical. At the heart of neurocomputing is the concept of spiking neural networks, or SNNs. These networks simulate the timing and the dynamics of real neurons spikes, enabling a new kind of computation that incorporates time, noise, and sparsity, three elements that brains leverage, but traditional AI systems often ignore. The field brings together neuroscience, electrical engineering, computer architecture, and machine learning, offering a rich interdisciplinary path for those interested in building the next generation of intelligent machines through the neuromorphic computing. Now, is neuromorphic computing discipline more of a hardware discipline or a software discipline? To some extent is both, but it actually leans more towards the hardware discipline, And here is how it differs from hardware to software. When it comes to hardware focus, the foundational goal of neuromorphic computing is to design new kinds of chips and circuits that mimic the structure and the function of the brain. For example, Intel's Loihi or IBM's True North or Europe's Brain Scale S are prime example for hardware of the neuromorphic computing. This involves analog, digital circuit design, custom chip fabrication, architecture, and neuromorphic sensor development, all the things that we've discussed last year in this channel. And if you're interested, for example, in electrical engineering, material science, this is the part where you would focus. However, when it comes to the softer end of part disciplines in the neuromorphic computing discipline, to run spiking neural networks or SNNs, we need specialized software framework, simulators, and interfaces that translate neural models into hardware compatible instructions. For example, tools like Brain2, Nest, Ningo, or PyNN allow researchers and engineers to simulate and prototype spiking models, often on traditional computers first. There's also a growing need for compilers, for example, runtime environments and machine learning tool chains that can bridge the gap between high-level models and low-level neuromorphic chips. While neuromorphic computing is a mashup of, as mentioned, neuroscience, electrical engineering, computer science, artificial intelligence, you really don't need to have PhD in all of these fields, but you can start by getting yourself familiar with the beginner level of some of these fields. And here I'm going to share with you, at least on the neuroscience perspective, where you can get started. From the neuroscience background of it, you can start by building some basic conceptual understanding of the brain, not the complex biochemistry of it, but the computational principle, thinking of the brain not just as an organ, but as a processor. In this case, I recommend a book called Neurons, Brains, and Artificial Intelligence by Anders Lansner. It's approachable and is tailored for beginners coming from AI or engineering background, and it gives you a sense of how real brain operates and how we can model the brain artificially. Another solid approach is to get the free online book and course by EPFL called Neuronal Dynamics by Wolfram Gerstner. It introduces neuron models, spike trains, and mathematics behind neural activities, but in a way that it's intuitive. You can even simulate basic neurons using Python, for example. Now, in parallel, you can take a free course from computational neuroscience on Coursera, for example, by University of Washington, that walks you through how real neurons work, how they process sensory information, and how you can model that using code. Me, myself, I took the computational neuroscience course. It was a summer class. I took it 2-3 years ago. And I can link it also down below so you can see how you can take it if you want. It's not from the University of Washington, but I'll add the link below if you're interested. That is not free, by the way. You have to pay for it. Okay, so once you get a foundational understanding as to how the brain processes information and how the biological neurons work, you can shift your attention to how engineers model the brain. This brings us to the spiking neural networks, or SNNs, which are the backbone of the neuromorphic computing. SNNs are not like your typical artificial neural networks that you may have seen in deep learning. Instead, they use continuous value and back propagation. They use discrete spikes and local learning rules like STDP, which is spike timing dependent plasticity, where these systems are more biologically realistic and energy efficient in comparison to your traditional neural network. This sounds quite intimidating in the beginning, but once you start experimenting with these things, these models can be quite okay when using Python framework, for example, like Brain2 or Nengo.ai. You don't need to build your own neuromorphic chip, but you can start simulating them using Python, for example. Once you feel like you're starting getting an understanding of the software portion of it, which in this case was understanding the neuroscience fundamental and the brain, as well as the Python and SNN's aspect of it, you can start exploring the hardware aspect of neuromorphic computing. Neuromorphic systems are not run on your regular, for example, CPUs or GPUs, as we talked in the past. Companies and universities are developing custom chips like Intel's Loihi or SPI and Naker that are designed to run spiking networks efficiently. Most of these platforms have software SDKs and cloud accessible simulators that you can apply to use Loihi, for example, via Intel's Neuromorphic Research Community. They are also called INRC, or simulate SNNs using Nest and PyNN locally on your own computer. Now, let's look at the type of careers that you might be able to land and or get into when it comes to neuromorphic computing. There are three main tracks that people usually follow. There's an academic research path, or applied R&D, research and development in the industry, or they build neuromorphic enabled products in robotics, medical technology, or in IoTs. If you're more of an academic person, then consider pursuing a master's or PhD in computational neuroscience, bio-inspired AI, or neuromorphic engineering. Labs like Human Brain Project or Stanford Neurogrid are good spaces to start if you want to go that academic route. For the industry path, you can get into companies like IBM or Qualcomm that are actively exploring neuromorphic chips for edge AI or robotics or even brain-machine interfaces. These roles offer required hybrid skills where you need to have some type of a neuroscience knowledge, as well as programming, as well as system design. But you don't have to wait until getting hired into these companies to get started. You can actually start by yourself by building a portfolio in creating small SNNs projects on GitHub, for example. You can implement these spiking neural models or SNNs and publish them on GitHub, for example. Simulate how, for example, a retina might respond to light pulses, or build a small event-driven sensory pipeline, for example, and publish it on your GitHub. Another way in which you can at least get yourself exposed to the career is to either be a passive subscriber to Discord channels, Slack channels, or blog and forums, or be an active one. So there are several, for example, places where you can join. There's a Neuromorphic Computing blog or Discord channels that you can easily search and find. Neuro-IPS, that is neuromorphic tracks, are also places that you can join, or spiking neural networks forums. You can position yourself by creating visibility, maybe also publish your work, especially when you start exploring in these areas, writing Medium articles, sharing them on LinkedIn, and so forth. But essentially getting yourself more and more inundated within the community, because that's also where you can start making connections with people in the industry or other students such as yourself. So to recap as to how you can enter the neuromorphic computing space, you can start by learning and teaching yourself some basic neural functions. You can also learn how to simulate spiking neurons, also understand spiking neural networks, SNNs, and how they differ from your traditional deep learning. And you can also explore hardware of the neuromorphic computing and build small projects, publish them on your GitHub, as well as connect with the community online and or in person if you attend any workshops or any, for example, conventions, workshop, etc. My understanding is that most people within the field of neuromorphic computing either have a neuroscience background or computer science background or electrical engineering background. And so you either have background in either of these spaces that you can enter, but if you don't, you can start familiarizing yourself as discussed in this video, and that is how you can start by getting into the field. But remember that neuromorphic computing isn't just about mimicking the brain, it's about rethinking computing itself. It's still in its infancy and it's have a huge potential to revolutionize our computing systems as we know them today. So if you are part of the wave that will be potentially in this field, consider yourself really early on in the field, because you would probably be one of the people in the future who could reshape computing as we know them today. So I hope this video helped you, and I hope also it was a beacon of light in the time that we're going through, because in my opinion, every time there is turmoil in the industry or in the world as a whole, all we can do is to stay hopeful and stay hopeful and about the future, if you will, and never stop learning, because the more we learn, the more educated we are, the more we can contribute to the future of society and to humanity as a whole. And so if you're thinking about getting into this field or any other field, I highly encourage you, because we need people who are positive, they work for humanity, and they're willing to sacrifice their lives in terms of bringing value to society, community, and the world as a whole. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.